The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending upon where you are. We want to welcome you to this session of the Virtualization Virtual Chapter, and we have David Klee with us today. There will not be a slide deck, so if you're looking for a slide deck, you won't have one. Do post any questions you have about virtualization, cloud and the virtualization, etc. And you can go ahead and start posting those, and I'll get those over to David. Um, and then we're going to start out this morning, David. We want to talk about the cloud. We want to talk about on-prem and what's going on there. So, David, I want to kind of let you start it out there.
You bet. This is an incredibly exciting time from a technology standpoint to be in the field that we're in. The world is changing. The world is changing fast. Just last night I saw that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise just bought SimpliVity. Incredible change. So you got public cloud, you got private cloud in the form of Azure Stack. You've got this hybrid approach that's just coming out of nowhere. I mean, the announcement recently with VMware and AWS, pretty soon you'll be able to extend your on-prem VMware environment out to bare metal at Amazon. It's fascinating. I'm trying to figure out what they're getting out of this. There's Azure Stack, which I'm really excited about. We're actually standing up a proof of concept of that last night in our lab. It's just an amazing time. There's so much change, and I'd love to know, and even in the form of blog post, whatever, I'd love to know what everybody out there are doing to keep up with this stuff, because the role of the DBA is changing with all of this. HADR from a cloud perspective, core SQL Server, T-SQL, core design is not changing that fast, but high availability, disaster recovery. What are we doing about security? What are we doing about the networking layer to get there and secure this thing when it's out of our wheelhouse? What's everybody doing to keep up with this? Because it's changing so fast. We try to stay on the cutting edge of this stuff, and it's hard. Let alone for folks that are stuck maintaining stuff every single day. What are people doing? It's crazy. So, I mean, what are you seeing, Tom?
It's one of those things that when I talk to people and stuff, there are still people, at least in my organization, that are not fearful of the cloud, but more or less when I've taught classes and stuff, it's kind of like the cost. They're really wondering, what's it going to cost me to put up that database up into the cloud? And of course, there's tools to do that that Microsoft has, at least on Azure. I'm not sure about AWS, but do you know your transaction throughput and stuff? And I know at least on our application, David, because they're using Entity Framework and sometimes they use lazy loads and stuff like that. It's almost like they're doing a select star against the database. And it's like, dude, if I went up to Azure, I better have a platinum card. So, but talking to people as I do my Azure presentation, it's kind of like, I think people are still kind of kicking the tires and trying to figure out what's it going to cost me. Does it make sense to go up there or does it not?
And that's a huge challenge, and it's honestly something we've been focusing on for a while. It's, to understand the cost, you have to understand what you need. To understand what you need, you have to understand where you're at and where you're going. And a lot of folks, they don't have a big budget or fancy tooling to get a lot of these metrics. So when you go to migrate to the cloud, or even just to figure out what size SAN do I need from a speed and capacity, how much data am I adding every month, what's my CPU consumption, and what kind of physical machines do I need? It's tough. It's almost like going in blind and just sort of guessing, and that's not good.
Yeah, I'd totally agree with that. That is kind of a guesswork. And then the other part, David, is especially on the Azure world, do I go to Azure SQL DB and let them kind of manage it all for me? or do I actually go over to um, an Azure VM? And of course, that all depends upon what things you have turned on in SQL Server, and do they have them coded yet, or SQL DB. So that's another thing that you have to consider is what's your feature set? What are you using?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what do you need there? I wish that there were clearer guidelines around it, but everybody's environment are different. So it's not Microsoft's fault. It's essentially we now give you a toolbox with 200,000 tools in it, and you need to pick the right tool for a given task, and it's tough. And that's why I say get out a credit card and stand up a VM out there for a day. Play. Just go tinker, take a workload, copy it up there, play around with it, test it in RDS, or test in SQL database versus RDS. Test the platforms, test the capabilities, grow drives, look at the performance characteristics, and it's really interesting. It doesn't take that much to stand up and play. Go to production. Your mileage may vary depending on what you need, but just to turn on something to tinker, pretty cheap. So hopefully you've got some kind of a budget to go explore. So I would urge you, go do this now so you can learn what the different layers of these things can or can't do. And that way you're more educated when your boss comes to you and says, hey, we're thinking of the cloud. You can go, well, based on how we're using this on-prem, this is what we need to do in the cloud. Here you go. Here's the options. And then you can actually pick a direction and go with it. And then tomorrow something changes and you have to go, adjust. But you'll have that basis to be there.
The other thing you can do, David, is they actually have, at least in Azure, they've got a 30-day free trial that you can go out there and sign up. If you're an MSDN through your company, you've got credits you can use. Now, I've turned mine on, left it on all month, and actually run out of credits by the end of the month. But they just turn it off, and then first of the month they turn it back on for you. So you can definitely go out there and play with it. The other aspect is put a developer up there. Have him just run technically all his work technically up in the cloud, and just kind of, they do have development environments and stuff. So, but again, it all boils down to how much money is it going to cost me?
Yeah. And to me, it always goes back to that fundamental question. What am I consuming right now? What do I need to consume a little further down the road? How does that line up with what the cloud offerings offer?
You know what? One of the advantages, David, that I've seen actually to the cloud that you may not have on-prem would be the fact of you can actually upsize your cloud machine by just going out there and say, I need a bigger machine. And you can do it for an hour. You can do it for 2 hours. You can do it if you're a retailer. You can do it through the Black Sunday to Christmas, and then you can turn it back down and then save yourself money to where, on prem, you've got to have all that hardware available there, and it's going to cost you. So you really can't do that type of adjustment on prem as easily without a justifiable cost, where in the cloud you can turn around and do it very easily.
Exactly. Yeah, you can do it on-prem. It takes some scripting, but you got to have that hardware sitting there. And that's the hardest part. You have to have the hardware sitting there. Cloud, you don't have to worry about it. It's just there. You just ramp it up as needed. We're doing some stuff with some pretty large performance data sets right now. I've got one database. I'm not kidding. I've got 15 billion perfmon data points in one little database. And for me to be able to crunch some aggregate reports, on Azure, just take the database, bump it way up, run the reports, dial it back. No big deal. Runs me, I think, what, $3 to go do that. Works great.
Yeah, yeah. That is one huge advantage to the cloud that I'm not seeing, um, to the on-prem, because most of us don't have the hardware to adjust it, and we wouldn't want to pay for the hardware to adjust it for an hour a month.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but it's definitely the other thing that people are is to educate people is if you're doing an Azure VM, it's really nothing more than going and asking your VM admin or your Hyper-V admin and saying, "Hey, I need a new box." The only difference is it's just not on-prem. It's not on site. You've just got another machine, and it just happens to be somewhere else, and that would be kind of like if you had a colo, which we do a colo, and so it's like someone else is hosting our machines. Well, that's exactly what the cloud is. Just someone else is hosting your machine for you, and
Yeah.
you don't basically have to have the hardware, and that's where your real cost savings is your hardware and your throughput and stuff. But you
Yeah.
have,
Well,
yeah,
that's how I kind of how I draw the line. On-prem, if you have to go to an infrastructure team and you say, I need a VM with these things in it, and they provision it and hand it back to you, that's on-prem virtualization. If you can go to a portal in your on-prem data center and hit a button and provision a VM, that's basically private cloud. You've got the hardware sitting there. It's a finite amount. You don't have infinite resources like a lot of these other companies do, but it's still end user self-servicing. That's what I call private cloud. When you hit public cloud, it's just somebody else's equipment. You're just renting the time rather than owning the hardware and slicing it up. That's the way I look at it. So, Amazon, Azure, great examples of this. They've got just essentially unlimited scale on the back end. You just rent what you need.
yeah. It's almost like a lease versus a buy a car, right? You can buy the car and you'll own it after a few years, or you can lease it and just run with it and buy lease you a Ferrari, and you can just as long as you don't run the miles out and stuff and damage it and stuff, you can just have a good old time, or you can buy you a Mustang, or whatever. So, and it costs you, about the same. Depends upon what you want to run.
Exactly. And we're in discussions with a lot of folks on, is the cloud right for my business and my app? And there is no one good answer there. We're doing a lot of hybrid approaches right now where, a lot of their core business critical applications may still be on-prem, but, websites, self-reporting portals for people in different locales, these are phenomenal ways to essentially start to scale out your workload. And we've got some, they're looking at an all or nothing approach because they're smaller. They don't want to have a full-time IT person on staff to maintain and manage the stuff because they don't need it. So we're looking at them. They're wanting to lift stuff, move it out there, but we have to go figure out. Well, some of them have laser printers, that, for labels that require on-prem hardware to interface with the cloud. So now is their latency fast enough to make the stuff work? I mean, it just gets real interesting. But it's a fascinating time because stuff is changing, and there's all these legacy gotchas with different apps, different tools, different hardware. All this stuff has got to interface. It gets real interesting really fast.
And it's interesting as we move forward, uh, how fast that we're going to really see people adapt to, going to the cloud versus being on-prem. Um, I kind of think that, as we look at new hardware and stuff like that, you've got to kind of go back and justify and say, okay, if I've got to buy a new VM server or a new SAN or whatever, or additional SAN space, is it time to move? You know,
hmm
so
Yeah, the last 6 months, I've seen an incredible uptick in interest in the cloud. I think people are really starting to look at it now that the prices have come down to a similar rate as what the good stuff on-prem is. The question is, are they ready? Is their business ready? Are their operational practices and procedures ready? And these are all things that it takes time to grow into, but they're getting there, and it's fun to be a part of.
yeah, yeah, it's definitely quite an interesting time.
Yeah. And that's why the education is so key, because, virtualization tore down silos. That's why I go around and do a lot of the classes, and I love doing the SQL Saturdays, because, you make a comment in one of the sessions and you see three-quarters of the people in the room go, and it's something that they've never thought of because they've never been exposed to that layer of the environment before, and it's just a blast. Well, when you hit cloud, stuff's changing even faster. And now, as a DBA, we have to know routing and firewalls and network latency, and we've got to know how to provision storage out there to get the speed that we need, and we've got to know how to monitor it all. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd definitely totally agree there. I look at the Azure and sometimes it just scares me because I'm like going, okay, you know, I need an AD, I need this, I need that, and I kind of wish they had, at least I haven't found it or haven't looked hard enough, kind of a roadmap to say that, okay, if I'm going to spin up a SQL server, here's all the different things you need. But, it's interesting. You go out into Azure and you spin it up. They do spin all that stuff up for you. So, but, and they've got some best practices. So it's getting there, definitely getting there to where it's time to really consider the cloud.
Yeah, and I know over the next year I'm looking to tool up some presentations for honestly this virtual chapter on, so you're a DBA and you're looking at the cloud. Where do you start? What do you need to do? What do we need to be aware of and pay attention to? So I'm hoping to present those later on this year.
Okay, all right, sounds very good. Very,
Cool.
very good.
Okay, so you want to get rolling with some questions here. So if
Yep.
you've got any questions at all, go ahead and throw them in the question window. We've got plenty of time.
All right, I posted some of them up there, and let me just kind of start reading them, and then we'll kind of get your answer. So you should be able to see them, David.
Okay.
What are the high-level steps to move VMDK VM up to Azure and AWS? Are there issues with converting VMDK files to either platform?
That's a really good question. I know, so VMDK, for the folks that haven't seen this kind of stuff before, a VMDK is a VMware-based virtual disk. So essentially we're talking about doing a virtual machine disk conversion between a VMware on-prem platform and either Azure or AWS in the cloud. If it were me, because of the nuances between those, what I would do is I actually wouldn't do a conversion there. What I would personally do is use something like Sios Data Keeper to replicate the contents of the drives. And this way, you've basically got this real-time, asynchronous but very, very good stream of whatever's changing. And this way, you don't have to worry about the nuances between the different platforms. You just provision a VM out there, you install Data Keeper in both, and you say replicate here to there and go. And it'll just do it. And whenever you're ready, you say stop. You turn off the on-prem machine, you turn on the cloud machine, and away you go. That's how I would do it. Now, both platforms have means to try to do these conversions. I'm not going to say they're perfect. I would say that if you replicate it in guest, specifically with Data Keeper, you're probably going to have a much better experience there.
Okay. Our next question is SQL Server 2016 brings new telemetry. Combined this with the cloud and Microsoft now see more errors in the product. Telemetry is a challenged organization. Do you think we have any concerns there?
It's a really good question. So knowing where Microsoft is going and how they've essentially changed their approach with being more transparent with the end user community, with being a lot more receptive to feedback, I'm actually okay giving them the telemetry on this. They've got some public statements out there about not collecting anything private. It's essentially usage information, errors, things that the kernel is seeing, just the stuff that they need to know about to make the product better. So I would claim that I actually don't have any real concerns with them collecting the telemetry out of the product. In fact, I claim it makes it better. They're able to get on top of these things quicker, faster, especially with a lot of the edge cases that we all see. If there's an edge case that throws a really strange bug, they'll have that data there that's a lot easier for them to go spot and track and say, yeah, this really is a big deal. We need to get on this right now. So I'm actually okay with it.
And I would agree with you there, David. I'm okay with them collecting, usage stats on the product and stuff too, because then they can turn around and look and see if is someone using Service Broker, or is their client base overall 1% using Service Broker or whatever the feature is, and that kind of lets them know basically, do I turn around and put more resources to this, or it's not a feature that's really used. So I think it just helps to make the product better. So
Yeah.
all right. Can you comment on change data capture, temporal tables, and other change tracking availabilities in SQL Azure? What is the easiest to use? What are the differences in change information available in each method?
Ooh, that is a really good question, and I'll be honest, I have not done a lot with CDC on Azure, so I'm going to take this as a to-do for me to do a little bit of research on, and I'll have Tom get this out to the group, because
Okay.
that's a really good question. I don't have a good one for you. Tom, do you have any insight on that?
I don't. In fact, I don't use change data capture myself right now, but I am getting ready to instigate it probably this year. So, it's just depends upon, I look at a temporal table more as a history table, right? That if you change data, you can actually see what you changed and how long the record was valid for. Um, where
Yeah.
and it's more of a history that say and believe me, I used it homegrown versions of it, and I caught a bank saying we didn't change that, and I had a history table and it said yes you did, and here's when you changed it. That's kind of more what a temporal table is used for, is kind of a history type of thing. Well, change data capture, at least from what we're looking at it from, if I understand it properly, is if something changes within the database, then I'm actually hopefully able to go and do an action against that. A piece of data change, so I need to turn around and actually push the data down to my data warehouse instead of waiting for a nightly process or something like that. So that's what
Yeah.
we're looking at it for.
Yeah, I haven't done much with CDC, especially on Azure, because I don't know if it's supported yet or not. I've done a fair amount with temporal tables. Temporal tables are awesome. You have to have the means to go query those history tables to go get it, and it doesn't show you who changed it. It shows you when it changed, but it doesn't tell you who changed it.
Right,
So I'd have to figure out what your requirements are for going to collect that info and what you need to see what changed. So there's a lot of options in there. I think both are great. Temporal tables, especially, because I'm using more of those myself. But the question there is, what do you need?
right, right. All right. Excuse me. Next question is, I have a number of infrequently user databases. I put them in an elastic basic pool, which is working, but now I want to go to a standard to give more EDTU per database. I think that's the cost, for the
Mhm.
cost basis. Uh, when they are being used. I don't see an option to do that other than create a new standard Elastic pool and move the databases. Have you messed with Elastic pools yet, David?
I have, but I've honestly never tried to move the database out of the or back out of the Elastic pool to a regular pool. I'm going to take that one as a to-do as well. I don't think there's a good way to do it, but I will double check on that.
Okay. All right. The next one we have is any comments on self-service BI tools like Power BI connecting to And there's your SQL database. It looks like each user has to have a firewall rule to open up their IP address to make a connection.
It all depends on the way the connection is set up between where you're at and the database. If you've got a site-to-site VPN, that should just automatically pass through and you should be okay. If the connection up to Azure is configured for point-to-site, where it's basically your machine directly to the database, then you would need to go set that up. But realistically, if you're behind a corporate firewall, they should have that ready to go, so you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff, hopefully.
Okay. How about going from Hyper-V to VM, changing VMs to one platform or another? Any
There,
comments there?
yeah, there are essentially V2V utilities are treated kind of like a P2V, and you can go back and forth. I'm always torn on that. They do a pretty good job, but the question is, at least from a SQL Server standpoint, is it easier to build out a new VM and then migrate databases, logins, jobs, things like that, or do you want to basically just lift and shift? So I'd always want to figure out, what's the cleanest way to do it. The V2V utilities, so, both Microsoft and VMware have good conversion utilities out there, and there are a number of third-party ones that do it as well. I'd wonder, do you want to do that, or do you want to migrate? I'm partial to migrating personally, but the other does work.
Okay. Considering virtualization, do you have any SQL monitoring tools which is the best fit for monitoring SQL instances?
Ooh. Okay, so this is the fun part here. As a third-party, unbiased consultant that does not resell anything, I try to be unbiased, and I always tell you, you need to get the utilities that best suit your needs. For me personally, when it comes to SQL Server monitoring, to have one tool that can do this, I'm very partial to SentryOne's SQL Sentry, recently rebranded SQL Sentry Company. I worked with them on getting the virtual layer in there. That's not to say they're the only one out there. I would want you to go. There's Redgate, there's Idera, there's SentryOne, there's SolarWinds. They all make very good tools, and they all operate differently. They each have their different viewpoint on how they look at things and how they present things. I'm partial to the SentryOne products because I feel like with the way that I use their system and the way that we work with databases, they're the most actionable for what we need. But get demos and trials of all of those and put them side by side and see what works for you. The virtualization extensions in these products work very well. They do tell you what the host is doing, they tell you what the VM layer is seeing, but put them through their paces. And your mileage may vary because you may want to look at things from a higher level perspective. Some of the tools go to very micro level, some do it at a macro level. Put them up side by side. And if you tell them that they're competing against the other ones, hopefully they'll give you a longer trial and some guidance on how to get used to their product. They'll show you how to use it, things like that, to really get you up to speed so you can do an educated apples to apples comparison there.
Yeah, and there's another one. Of course, they just split off from Dell. You got Quest software that does that, and that just happens to be the one we use. Once you're ingrained with one, it's very hard to move to another one because of the costs. So
Yeah.
So anyway, uh, differences between database mirroring and always on in the cloud environment.
Differences. Well, if you're on a VM that's got SQL Server on it, very few differences. If you can do that on-prem, you can do it in the cloud. The differences would be the security around it. Normally, if you're on-prem, a lot of the stuff is wide open behind, at the server network level. If you're in the cloud, you do have to worry about opening up firewall ports, making sure that routes are there, making sure that the availability zones are set up right so that you can actually have high availability if a data center goes offline. You do have to think about that. But just from a core architecture perspective, not too much changes there.
Well, and the big key there too, David, is that you have to have a VM, an Azure VM. You can't do SQL DB in this type of thing. So you got to look at the type of thing that you put up in the cloud. So that,
Yeah, and the question there is what do they need the level of HA there for? Are the SLAs on Azure SQL database not good enough? And arguably there are a lot of needs out there where that SLA just isn't good enough. They need to be able to patch that sort of thing. So, you know, what do you need?
well, there's other things within the cloud that you may or may not need to turn these on because of geo replication and stuff like that that you can just replicate your database over, and if one data center went down then the other one would come up. So what's your thoughts there? Do we really need those with the geo replication?
Well, that's another good question. If it were me personally, I would claim that the failover time of AGs is far superior to what a regular cloud platform can do from just a high availability standpoint. I would claim that that works great. The geo replication to another region is wonderful. The question there is that good enough to replace what SQL Server itself can do for DR? And I don't know, because it all depends on the RPO and the RTO. If you've got a 3-node AG, two synchronous, one asynchronous to another region, what if your RPO is 1 minute? And what if your RTO is 5 minutes? Is that fast enough to get a geo-replicated SQL Server up and off the ground fast enough? I doubt it. So it depends on what you need. Now, that said, the other part goes organizational. Who in your organization is responsible for SQL Server HA? And then who's responsible for SQL Server DR? Is the DR piece responsible by the DBA, or is it more of an enterprise architect that wants one button, one methodology to fail an entire platform over to somewhere else? And it goes back to what's the delegation of duties there and whose role is it, should it be? Conversely, it may not be best suited in that person's role. So what do you need to do to make sure that your requirements for your job are still met, even though they may be the one hitting the buttons to go do it?
Okay. Yeah, there's so many different options now that you got to kind of weigh them all based upon your requirements. So
Yeah,
uh, in a
like I
virtual
said, it's an
environment,
interesting time.
go ahead.
Oh no, it's a real interesting time because it's just like what virtualization did a while back. The way that things have been done when you apply these new technologies that are essentially outside of the traditional scope of the DBA, sometimes these processes and these tools can actually replace what we've always done to make it better. And sometimes people go and say, "No, Shiny, you're going to do this." It may not be as good as where you're coming from, so you got to be really careful.
Right, right. In a virtual environment, the databases are stored in SAN. Is index fragmentation still a problem each DBA should be concerned about?
Absolutely. Yeah, this one there's no gray area on this one. Um, Index fragmentation is still a big problem, largely because if it's on the SAN, yeah, hopefully the SAN is fast. If it's not, it's even worse. But if the SAN is fast, the database engine still has to deal with the fragmentation. It's still got to deal with parsing and extracting and finding the data that you want to go grab. So no matter what, SAN or not, cloud or not, you definitely want to go really make sure that the index maintenance is being done properly in both indexes and stats. It's vitally important no matter where you're at or what storage you're on.
Okay. In Azure, there is a detailed pricing calculator, but I have not been able to really understand how it is actually applied. If I configure a group of VMs, SQL servers, etc., how can I see what the pile of resources is costing per hour as things are turned on and off?
That is the magic question right there. Um, I don't have a good way to do it. You essentially have to go piecemeal a lot of this stuff together, and I don't like that answer. Um, it's one of those things I want Microsoft to improve, and I hope they're working on it. Because being able to go see consumption, it's arguably a weak point, not just of them, but really of a lot of the cloud providers, to be able to see what was consumed, when were things turned off, when were things turned on, a lot of that auditing and logging to see why that price is what it is. It's tough.
Yeah, I had a Microsoft Azure guy in one of my sessions on beginning Azure, and we were talking about the DTUs and stuff, and people were asking like, "Well, what does that, entail?" And he was basically saying memory, CPU, throughput, and it was like there was so many different things that to try to come down and nail down, well, what am I really getting charged for is very difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah, and I will say that this this concept here of why is my bill what it is and how does this break out, this is something that we're trying to tackle internally here, and if we can make some headway in it, there may be some tooling or something that we can release to try to make this a little bit more transparent for folks.
Yeah, yeah. Good luck. Good
Yeah,
luck.
exactly.
That's all I could say is good luck. I think it's this uh, maze of machinery that they've put in play, and you know, I'd like to see the code and the algorithm behind it to try to figure it out. So it'd be crazy. Next question is Microsoft offered SSRS as a service for a while but dropped it. Was it technically failing or just not cost effective? And what are the options now for Azure SQL reporting, especially from the transaction table instead of a warehouse?
Ooh, another really good question. These are awesome, everybody. Um, they had SSRS as a service and they dropped it. I don't know why they dropped it. I wish I knew. My gut tells me it was something with the multi-tenancy portion of the platform. Um, so what are options now, especially reporting from the transaction table? I would say if you've got the means to go do reporting against this and you don't have a warehouse, check out Column Store. Um, we have been doing a tremendous amount of work with Column Store lately, and essentially adding Column Store indexes next to the traditional row store indexes for regular OLTP work. It just provides just so much faster performance because it's just built for that sort of thing. And especially now in 2016 SP1, where they included it in Standard Edition, um, I would urge you to go explore Column Store because you can essentially, you don't have to do any code changes, you don't have to do any of that. You just drop it on top of what you've already got and go from there.
All right.
In terms of the presentation layer, it could be in Azure SQL or basically an Azure VM with SQL Server reporting services on there that you go connect to these other data sources. I wish there were a better mechanism right now, but I don't have any good options for it unless you do some BI delivery piece that may have a separate license model other than just another SQL Server instance.
Aren't they really trying to push everything toward Power BI also?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
Power BI is awesome. It's amazing. The question is it what you need? And I would claim that if you can get the front end reporting out of Power BI, you could apply Column Store on the back end to make the reporting a lot faster, a lot more efficient. I'd personally take a real good look at that.
yeah, that's kind of where I would push somebody is go toward Power BI. So, all right. We have run out of questions. Let's see if someone else has a question that's in the audience. Feel free to go ahead and submit them. We've answered all of them to this point. So, so David, what's while we're kind of waiting for maybe some questions, So, what's the biggest challenges you're still seeing out there in the VM world?
It's
Uh,
education.
Education.
It's
Yeah.
education. And we still do a tremendous amount of training, honestly, almost every week, where DBAs have this black box called infrastructure and stuff's running slow. And then they turn around and the infrastructure team is saying everything's fine. And by the way, you don't need all this RAM, and why is this stuff killing the storage every night? And they don't meet in the middle, and they can't because it's they speak two different languages. We had one just last week. DBAs were seeing 40, 50,000 long I/O alerts every night. Disk latency was upwards of 4 to 600 milliseconds. And around the clock, not just at night. And the storage team, everything was all flash array, tremendous equipment, and we were seeing 1, 2 milliseconds. The VM team, same thing. We were seeing the same 1 to 2 milliseconds, and they're blaming each other, and they're saying, "You're wrong, you're wrong." Well, I get in and take a look, and they're both right. you know, and well, they were bottlenecking at the disk controller inside Windows before it got out to the VM layer. And you sit back and you show them why, and then, okay, well, we're going to add a few more disk controllers. Let's turn the VM off, redistribute the workloads, tweak a couple minor little things, turn it on, and magically the database server performance doubled, and life goes on, and everybody's happy. But it's hard. They don't speak the same languages. So we're expanding the training that we're doing this year. We're trying to get the word out more, and we're making some changes internal here so I can spend some more time blogging because this stuff is vital. We get the amount of traffic I get to my home blog with some of these posts from 2, 3 years ago was just awesome, and I want to keep that up because if you can speak their language and logically, you don't have to be a rocket scientist with any of these layers. If you can speak their language and identify it's good here, it's good here, it's bad there, what's in between, you can go so much farther in the organization with working together, and it makes you stronger as a data professional when you have that knowledge of what's around it and can translate what you think to what they need to hear.
Yeah, it's like a Lego building set. If you don't have the pieces in place in the proper order and it's flowing through, then something has. It's interesting that I didn't tell you, David. I'm actually selling my house and moving 12 miles away. But one of the things is the inspector came out and was going, hey, there's, when I fill up the sink and I turn on the garbage disposal, water comes up in the second sink. I'm like going, well, yeah, it's got to go somewhere if you're pushing it faster, you know? So it's, like the example I told you earlier, that my previous company, we upgraded, went to a new SAN, went to new servers, new version of SQL Server, and we blew out the internet pipe because we were pushing data so fast that the internet pipe couldn't handle it anymore.
It's
So,
yeah,
so
it's
you got,
all one big system.
yeah,
You change one thing, you remove that bottleneck, and the whole thing changes.
so you got to look at each little piece of a server or whatever that might be causing your issue, so it's very challenging. And a lot of times no one knows each piece. So,
Yeah, and it's tough. And part of my day job is to go in environments and try to put these pieces together, and it's hard. When one team has no, and it's not the fact that they don't have the visibility into the other teams. A lot of these groups have no interest in knowing what the other teams are doing, and that's where I have a difference with them. If they don't care what the other team's doing, it's like this all works together. It's all one big system. You got to play nice. You got to know what the other stuff's doing. So at least try to understand logically what's going on there. It makes you be able to do your job better.
right, right. Are you seeing that database professionals are still being locked out of the vSphere and stuff like that, or
Oh yeah.
is it getting better?
No, I did a follow-up call just honestly about an hour and a half ago with the training class that I did back in December. I always do one a month afterwards in case anything, any lingering questions are out there. And two of the guys came back and said, we needed to get access, one of them for vCenter, one of them for System Center, and their infrastructure team just kept saying no. One of them, um, they were nice enough to let them shoulder surf and click around a little bit, but they still wouldn't give them direct access to it. And it's just hard, So what happens anytime there's a performance blip? Well, the blame gets thrown onto the other team, and they're now guilty until proven innocent, and it just wastes everybody's time.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely does, because it's definitely going through things.
Yeah.
So, don't have any more questions, so maybe we just might end it a little early today.
Okay. Well,
So,
last call, everybody.
all right. So,
Yeah. Well, I would say let's, I'd love to come back and do this again here pretty soon. And, if anybody's got any questions, make sure to send them over. Be happy to answer them.
all
And
right.
actually, if you have specific questions that you'd love to see a presentation about, for example, how do we translate our on-prem infrastructure knowledge to cloud as a data professional? Or how do we know if the cloud is right for us? Um, you know, these are the kinds of things I'd love to create a presentation with those in mind to be able to help solve a lot of these riddles.
All right. Sounds good, Dave. And I will talk at you later then.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.